His name was Ranger Samuel Avila, assigned to Fire Lookout Station 29, Mendocino County, deep in the Northern California ranges. A quiet station posted high above the forest line, bordering the more remote edges of the redwood corridors, where the trees seem too old to speak, and the wind carries things further than it should. Avila wasn't new. 10 years of service, 2 commendations, and 0 incident reports until fall of 2018. He was the kind of man you never noticed because he did his job so well. There was nothing to notice, no missed calls, no false alarms, just clean logs, steady hand, clean conscience. But then, one season before his sudden resignation, he changed. First, his shift reports began arriving late. Then, not at all. Field checks went unanswered, and when a junior ranger was finally sent to investigate Station 29, they found the tower abandoned. Supplies left untouched. His last meal still sealed, radio intact. But Avila was gone. No note, no trail, no blood. What they did find was a single tape recorder, buried in the corner, wrapped in thermal fabric and duct tape, as if he had tried to hide it from something. On it, a label scrawled in fading ink. Tower log, fall 18. The first few seconds are static. Wind, creaking, then a voice, calm, controlled, low. This is Ranger Samuel Avila, Fire Lookout 29. I don't know who's getting this, but if anyone's still down there, this might be the last thing I log. I've stopped keeping the official charts. That doesn't matter anymore. A pause. The wind picks up. You hear something metal shift. Maybe the base of the tower. Maybe not. Then his breath returns. Uneven. Slower. Like he's trying to stay composed, but it's costing him something. You think we're trained to watch for fire, to scan ridgelines for smoke columns, watch the wind direction, calculate burn speed, terrain shifts. And yeah, that's all part of it. But the fire wasn't the thing creeping up the ridgelines. He trails off. The mic picks up distant creaking. There were nights I wasn't watching for flames. I was watching the tree lines. I was praying they didn't see me. That's when the signal cuts. A sharp tone hits the recording. High frequency, like a beacon triggering. Then, silence. And that's all they found. No final radio call, no personnel dispatch, and no sign of Samuel Avila. When internal logs from the Forest Service were quietly reviewed a year later, something strange emerged. 3 similar reports, going back decades from that exact station. Same time of year, same region, all filed under different names, all missing critical pages, all ending in resignation or disappearance. And none of them were ever followed up. Now, for the first time, we've reconstructed what we can, using field records, archived audio, and Ranger Avila's own words. The events you're about to hear are true. They've been suppressed, edited, and in some cases, erased. But they were real. And they began, according to Avila, not with fire, not with weather, but with something outside the perimeter, something that shouldn't have been there. This is MindFuel. Subscribe to stay with this case as it unfolds. Chapter by chapter, we'll uncover what was left behind. Because some truths weren't meant to be buried, and some tapes were never meant to be found. We begin now. When Samuel Avila first accepted the post at Tower 29, he didn't hesitate. He was used to solitude. 10 years of quiet assignments had prepared him for this one. At least, that's what he thought. The tower was located in one of the least active wildfire zones in Northern California. A stretch of dense woodland tucked between 2 ridgelines, bordered on 3 sides by rock and ravine. Only one unpaved access road connected it to the nearest ranger station, over 40 miles south, through forest that had claimed more than one service vehicle in the wet seasons. But to Samuel, it was a dream post. No tourists, no distractions, no red tape, just elevation, routine, and radio reports. a seasonal rotation with basic perks, a cabin built into the base of the tower, rations refreshed weekly by supply drop, and no night patrols. Simple, quiet, uncomplicated. But the paperwork hinted at something else. Tower 29 had an unusually detailed set of operational rules, longer than most fire stations. Along with the standard safety briefings were specific behavioral guidelines. Some of them read more like superstition than protocol. Do not descend after dusk, unless smoke is visible. Do not respond to radio signals not listed in the frequency sheet. Do not engage unknown voices outside the tower. And then, the last note, circled in pen on the orientation folder. You'll hear things up here. Wind, maybe voices. Don't leave the tower unless it's smoke. Avila dismissed it at first, thought maybe the last ranger had been superstitious, or maybe joking. But on his first night, he recorded this. First log. October 7th. Sunset was sharp, came down fast. I thought I heard someone near the gravel path around 1900 hours, just movement, light footsteps, but I radioed the station, no personnel dispatched. Could have been a deer. The second night, his voice was tighter, shorter pauses between sentences. Something tapped the side of the cabin, software like fingers, no wind, no rain, no one reported within range. By the third night, he stopped giving timestamps. He started talking like someone who'd begun to realize the job wasn't what he signed up for. I can't explain this, but the tree line, it doesn't look the same at night. It's the same shape, but it's like it presses in closer when the sun goes down. I marked 2 Douglas firs yesterday, east perimeter. Tonight they're either gone or moved. No tracks, just different. That audio log ended abruptly. When we cross-referenced satellite data from that week, something odd surfaced. 2 missing hours of infrared satellite coverage from the region, starting just after midnight on October 10th. An entire quadrant of forest went visually dark. According to internal system notes, it was an alignment error. But the gap remained. Avila kept recording. Over the next 5 days, his routine shifted. He stopped sleeping at night. He reported bird patterns that didn't match local wildlife. He noted long, uninterrupted silences during dawn, an absence of insects, of ambient hum, even of wind. He started keeping watch with the cabin lights off. There's something about the way the forest moves after 2 a.m. It's not natural, it's not the wind. There's a rhythm to it, like breath, like it's waiting for me to stop looking. His logs began to drift. What started as clean, methodical observations slowly broke down into murmurs and fragmented thoughts. I saw a man last night, I think. He was past the marker, standing still, pale, no gear, no flashlight, just watching. I hit the floodlight. He was gone before it reached him. In his next transmission, his tone changes entirely. I filed a report. Nobody responded. I'm not sure they got it. I'm not sure they want to. I think they've heard this before. Maybe they've heard worse. From that point forward, Avila stopped using official channels. He began recording only to tape, leaving behind voice logs that no one was meant to find. Each tape was dated, each one shorter than the last. We have 12 of them, and they mark a descent, not just into fear, but into a state of mind that most rangers are never trained to confront. One man, one tower, 40 miles from help, a forest that did not behave as it should, and something on the edges of that forest that had learned how to wait. Stay with us. What comes next is the first confirmed contact, the moment when Avila's warnings shifted from caution to terror. This is MindFuel. Subscribe now. And remember, some towers aren't built just to watch for fire. Some are built to keep watch on something else. Chapter 2 begins next. In the first week, Ranger Samuel Avila adjusted quickly. The solitude he expected. The absence of distraction he welcomed. The tower's elevation offered a clean vantage. 7 miles of unbroken canopy to the north, cliffs to the west, and a single ridgeline across the southern horizon, nearly 600 yards from the base of the tower. He began logging routine entries again. Observations on wind shifts, minor ground haze, owl migrations. He described the forest as resting, still, too still. But he convinced himself it was just how this part of the range behaved. The first few nights were uneventful. The wind carried long, soft movements through the trees. Branches leaned in rhythm. Leaves murmured against each other like quiet, scattered breath. You could almost believe nothing existed outside that tower but trees, time, and your own thoughts. Avila's voice on the recordings had steadied. He even laughed once, quietly, at the way a raccoon had pawed at the bottom step. Then, on day 5, the logs changed. At 1:42 a.m., according to the tape's timestamp, the emergency radio activated, not with a call, but with a low static hum, drawn out, tonal, not random. It didn't sound like interference. He described it as too clean, no bursts, no oscillation, just a single sustained note, rising and falling like breath in a narrow throat. He shut the unit down, reset the backup, blamed it on weather bounce or magnetic feedback, logged it, moved on. But the next night, it returned. Same time, same tone, lasted 13 minutes, then cut to silence without warning. Still, he made no report. He only started keeping written notes again on day 7. They began with a sentence scribbled across a page in pencil. "There's something on the ridge." That evening, as the last light receded behind the cliffs, he saw a glint, a sharp, fast flicker, where the sun touched the tree line on the far ridge. At first, he thought it was light catching a bird's eye. Maybe a lens from a hunter's scope, though hunting was prohibited for 30 miles in every direction, but then it blinked again. Same position. Not a flutter, not movement. It reflected, deliberately. Avila used his binoculars. The audio log captures the moment. It's not a person. It's too tall. No gear, no clothing, just silver. In the face. But not eyes. I don't think it's looking at me. I think it already knows where I am. The glint vanished after 22 seconds. And that night, the static came again. This time shorter, just under 6 minutes. On day 8, he logged it again. Same spot, same time, just after sunset. A shape, upright, tall, thin, reflective at the head, but the glint was dimmer this time, as if it had shifted its position. "It didn't walk away," he recorded. "It just wasn't there anymore." No print, no heat signature, nothing on the infrared lens. The following night, it returned, and the next. Always the same ridge, always at the same hour, just as the last trace of gold faded from the canopy. And then something else happened. On day 10, when the glint returned, Avila didn't turn on the binoculars. He waited, let the light fade naturally, logged everything by sound. "It's closer, still on the ridge, but near the edge. I can hear something different tonight. It's not walking. But the trees, it's like they're shifting slightly. Like whatever it is, it's heavy enough to make the trunks lean." He began leaving the tower light off entirely, sat in darkness with a notebook and a thermal scope. The next tape begins with a whisper. I think it waits for me to move. I think it comes only when I'm still. The audio picks up faint background sounds. No insects, no wind, just slow, intermittent creaks like wood twisting under strain. He never used the word fear, not once, but his entries became shorter, repetitive, less structured, as if he'd started measuring time by how long the thing stayed, and how long he could go without looking at it. On day 12, The static tone returned, but this time it came from the tower's intercom, a unit wired only for internal broadcast. It shouldn't have made any sound, but the tone played, and underneath it, just barely, a voice. Not full words, more like syllables being repeated, breathy, off rhythm, foreign. Sha, Kai, Sha, Kai, Sha, Kai. He unplugged the unit, disconnected the wiring, and still, on day 13, the voice returned. He no longer mentioned the ridge, as if by acknowledging it, he'd somehow made it stronger. The last line of his day 14 tape is barely audible. But it's there, carved into the bottom of the audio. It's learning how to wait. What came next marked a shift from observation to interaction. In Chapter 3, we uncover the night Avila heard it breathing beneath the tower, and he realized, for the first time, that it no longer needed to watch from afar. This is MindFuel. Subscribe and stay close. The forest is still quiet, but the ground has started to move. By day 15, something had changed. Avila's logs had become inconsistent, often started mid-thought. Pages in his notebook bore fragments, sentences abandoned halfway through, some written over themselves again and again. But the tower itself was intact. Equipment operational, food untouched, routine maintenance logged. It was only when night fell that the pattern returned. The thing on the ridge, the static on the intercom, then the voices. They began as whispers, just beneath the range of conscious hearing. He'd pause during a sentence, look up from his recorder, and stare toward the window as if listening to something behind the glass. He didn't describe them at first, only hinted. It's not an echo, it's not wind. It's repeating what I said last night, word for word, same breaks, same order. I didn't play the recording, something else did. He heard it again on day 16. Around 2:15 a.m., the same phrase he'd said the night before. Ridge is too quiet. Too quiet, I think it's waiting, whispered from the trees. Same cadence, same pause. Ridge is too quiet. I think it's waiting. At first, he thought it was playback. Maybe the signal was bouncing. But the radio was off. Power disconnected. The unit was still in pieces from the night he'd torn out the wiring. The whispers weren't mechanical. They were outside, carried through the trees like breath across dry pine. And then, one night later, something worse. A voice repeated a phrase he hadn't spoken since before the tower, a sentence that hadn't been recorded. It was his father's voice, dead 5 years, gone before Avila ever worked the northern range. And it said, "You left the gate open again, Sam. You always forget the gate." That same tired frustration, that low baritone rasp he'd grown up hearing across every fence line and field. He froze, didn't log anything for hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely there. It knew his tone. It knew his word. There's no way it could have known. The whisper came again the next night. Closer. "You always forget the gate." Followed by a long silence. Then, something heavier. Scratching. Not sharp, not frantic, but deliberate. Something was dragging itself around the base of the tower, not pacing, circling. He waited until daylight. Didn't move. Didn't speak. In the morning, he descended the steps for the first time in days. He found no tracks, no footprints, no hair, only markings, deep gouges in the 2 southern supports, 4 narrow claw paths, too far apart to be a bear, too clean to be accidental. He followed the perimeter, found old scat, rabbit maybe, but twisted. Bones inside bent the wrong direction, like the animal had been crushed and put back together. He circled out 40 feet, then 60. Nothing. But the silence hung there again. No birds, no wind, just the trees, and the sense that something had stood there while he slept. That night, The voices came earlier, multiple now, layered, some higher, some like children repeating his words in rhyme, others low, familiar, all of them slightly off, as if they were learning how to copy tone, but not intent. You always forget the gate. Ridge is too quiet. I think it's waiting. At 3:12 a.m., he turned the floodlight on, swept it once across the ridge, and caught something moving, not away, toward. Just before it hit the trees, it dropped low, but what stood out wasn't the movement. It was what it left behind. A single white object in the pine needles. Avila retrieved it the next morning, a torn page from his own field log, one that hadn't left the cabin. The handwriting wasn't his, and on it, only one line. I know where the gate is now. From that moment on, Avila stopped logging weather, stopped mentioning the ridge. The tower became something else, a cell maybe, or a mouthpiece for something trying to become more human. In Chapter 4, we uncover what Samuel recorded when he finally left the tower at night, and how, just hours later, he was found miles away, face down in the moss, eyes open, whispering to someone who wasn't there. This is MindFuel. Subscribe now. The further in we go, the less the forest lets go. And there are still tapes we haven't played. After the voices began mimicking the dead, after the claw marks and the note that shouldn't exist, something in Avila changed. He stopped trying to disprove it. He stopped speaking into the recorder, but he didn't stop listening. He started sleeping during the day, fully dressed, covered the windows with blackout cloth, and at night he sat still, sometimes for hours, without recording. On day 21, something small but important happened. He opened the supply cabinet. Not for food, not for tools, but because a humming sound, a low, dull buzz, seemed to be coming from inside it. Behind the lantern fuel, beneath a tangle of paracord and spare mesh netting, he found a thin layer of dust. Beneath that, a binder. Pale blue plastic. Faded. Cracked along the spine. Labeled in dry marker. Tower 9, logs 1981 to 1986. The pages were brittle, yellowing. Some were handwritten, others typed. And every entry had one thing in common. The author never signed their name. Early pages were uneventful. Inventory counts, fire risk levels, wildlife sightings. But starting in late 1984, things shifted. Mentions of humming, whispering, voices in the trees. Then, patterns. Night 14, shadow on South Ridge. Night 15, shadow again. Same place, closer. One entry described something tall, brushing the windows without touching the glass. Another, emergency radio plays own transmission, repeats words I haven't said yet. And then came the drawings, crude, mostly silhouettes, but always the same image. A tower, something beneath it, and a line written over and over again in different ink. They climb now. He turned to the final page, the last log, dated October 14th, 1986. No timestamp, just a line across the top in capital letters. Final entry. And the words, they climb now. Don't sleep. They remember. That page was torn, partially charred at the bottom like someone had started to burn the binder but changed their mind. Avila flipped the cover shut. Sat there. Didn't move. He checked the tower registry. There was no Tower 9. At least, not anymore. Tower numbers were reshuffled after 1990 when several were decommissioned. Tower 9, as far as records showed, had burned down in 1987. Arson, they said. The logs made no mention of a fire. No suspect was ever named. But now, 38 years later, its forgotten records sat buried in Tower 11's cabinet. Avila's post. No explanation. No documentation of the transfer. He placed the binder in his footlocker, sealed it shut. That night, the wind didn't move. The forest stood still, and at 3:47 a.m., his recorder clicked on by itself. A single sentence was captured, his voice, but he hadn't spoken. They remember the fire. The next morning, the sky was overcast, ash gray. A light layer of soot had formed on the western balcony. No burn in the area. No nearby smoke, just that powder-soft residue on the wood railing, and a set of fingerprints pressed into it. Long, narrow, too long for a person. Avila didn't log the prints. He wiped them away. But that night, something climbed the stairs, slowly, one creak at a time, and stopped just beneath the floorboards. Then he heard the scratching. 4 claws, same spacing, same drag, but no pressure. Not like an animal, like fingers remembering how to move. In Chapter 5, we uncover what happened on the night the tower door opened by itself, and why, decades after Tower 9 fell, something keeps climbing the hills, one tower at a time. This is MindFuel. Subscribe now, and don't forget, when the forest goes quiet, it's already listening. On the 25th day, the weather changed. High-pressure front came in from the coast. Temperature dropped 7 degrees. The wind changed directions. That night, just after 8 p.m., the radio crackled to life. Dispatch. Static. Then a clipped voice. Female. Probably young. "We've got a missing person report. Male, 34. Solo backpacker. Last check-in was 5.1 miles west of Tower 11. Keep your eyes open. Copy?" Avila hesitated. His voice was raw when he keyed the mic. "Copy. No sign of activity at present." The reply came back too fast. "That area is lightly trafficked. Don't approach anything alone. Maintain line of sight with your tower." It wasn't a strange warning. Standard protocol. Rangers were always told not to wander too far from their posts after dark, especially during search operations. But the phrasing felt cautious, like she knew something more. He locked the cabin, turned on both floodlights, and began scanning the tree line. Nothing for almost 2 hours. Then movement. Northwest slope past the first ridge. Someone staggering through the undergrowth. Male, tall, wearing a dark hoodie or jacket. He was hunched, but his arms were moving. The strange part wasn't the walk. It was the angle of the head. It was too far back, tilted almost straight to the sky, as if the spine had bent in reverse and never returned. The figure would walk 5 steps, then freeze, then another 5 steps, then stop again. Avila raised his binoculars. No details. The distance was too great, but the posture was wrong. Wrong in the way dreams feel wrong. He reached for the radio again. "Tower 11, visual on unknown male, north-northwest quadrant, possibly the missing backpacker. Movement is unusual." There was a pause, a short beep, then dispatch came through again. "That sector is marked restricted. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." Restricted? He flipped through the terrain map. Nothing was marked restricted. No recent burns, no construction zones, no wildlife alerts. He pressed the mic again. "Please confirm. No such restriction listed for this range. Tower 11 requests clarification." This time the reply was cold. "That wasn't a request, Tower 11. Do not engage." And then silence. The man in the woods stopped walking. He turned, not with his feet, but just his head. Bent backward, neck stretched, chin lifted to the sky, but his face was aimed directly at the tower. He didn't move again. Avila didn't sleep. At dawn, he scanned the same slope. No figure, no trail, no tracks. But something else had changed. About 15 yards from the base of the tower, a line had been drawn into the soil, perfectly straight, as if with a branch or stick, 6 feet long. On one end, a crude circle. On the other, a square with a vertical line down the middle. Avila didn't recognize the symbols, not fully, but the square resembled the diagram on his laminated fire escape plan, the tower floor plan. He photographed it, logged the location. Later, after a cold breakfast and an internal report drafted but never sent, he unlocked the cabinet again. Inside, he found the binder still sealed, untouched, but tucked just beside it, a folded page that hadn't been there before, a printout of a search bulletin dated July 1986. Same area, same missing camper case, but scribbled across the margin in pen. Found him standing up, neck bent backward, eyes open, repeating coordinates. Below that, this was the same place Tower 9 warned about. They keep the shape, but forget the motion. That line stayed with him. They keep the shape, but forget the motion. That night, Avila turned off the floodlights, sat in total darkness. He waited. At 1:14 a.m., something approached from the west. The same shuffle, the same slow stop-start rhythm. Then the creaking of steps, one by one, up the tower. In Chapter 6, the door opens. And what stands there isn't what Avila saw through the binoculars. It's something wearing the idea of a man. This is MindFuel. Subscribe and stay with us, because now the tower remembers too. It began with the fog, dense, fast. Around 6:20 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. Air pressure fell. The western ridgeline vanished in under 90 seconds. Fog doesn't usually move like that. It rolls, settles, bleeds into valleys. But this came in fast, intentional, as though it had a path to follow. Night arrived early. By 7:10, Avila could barely see the stairs leading down from the trapdoor. And by 7:35, the whole world below the balcony was gone. Just soft gray. A moving wall of wool-colored silence. The radios stayed quiet. Avila waited, watched. Logged the weather shift with mechanical precision, though his hands trembled each time they hovered above the pen. At 9:13 p.m., movement. That same figure, if it was still the same, appeared from the west slope, half lost in the fog. Shoulders wrong, head now tilted even farther if that was possible. It wasn't walking anymore, it was shifting, feet scraping forward, then pausing unnaturally, as if balancing on limbs that didn't know how to hold weight. Avila watched through binoculars, breath held, fog swallowed everything from the knees down. Then it paused, mid-slope, maybe 80 yards from the base of the tower. It stood there, motionless. The fog curled around it, cloaking the edges of its form, the way smoke bends around a wall. Then it disappeared, not walked off, gone. 1 second there, the next, erased. No sound, no sign. Avila remained at the glass for hours, didn't blink. At 1:41 a.m., he finally backed away, sat down on the cot, hands numb, and that's when it came. One knock, from beneath him, directly under the floorboards. Not a pounding, not a crash, just a slow, deliberate tap, like a finger, finding the right place to press. He stared at the trapdoor. It hadn't been opened in weeks. The hatch led to the stairs, which led to the forest floor, which should have led to nothing. Another knock. Same spot. Then silence. For a moment, he thought the fog had reached inside. The windows steamed from the corners, condensation thick enough to bead and roll. And there, across the interior glass, handprints, not palm first, fingertips only, 5 at a time, slowly dragging downward. He reached for the emergency flare, but his hands wouldn't move, because he realized the prints were inside. A sound came from behind the cabinet, like rope being pulled through water. He turned slowly, and there, under the shadow of the shelf, just beyond the lantern's reach, something shifted. Not moving toward him, not away, just shifting, rearranging, like it was trying to remember how arms worked. Then silence again. Dead. Full silence. No wind, no tower creaks, no breathing, because even Avila had stopped that. He said he doesn't remember what happened next, only that when he came to, the trap door was open. Not broken, not forced. Just open, and the fog had left. In Chapter 7, he finds the thing it left behind. Not a body, not a message, something worse, a recording of himself from 2 days in the future. You're watching MindFuel. If you're still here, subscribe now, because what's coming up that hill next doesn't want to be alone anymore. The next morning brought rain, not a storm, not thunder or lightning, just a steady mist-heavy downpour that soaked the canopy and turned the wooden balcony slick and dark. He'd slept in 2-hour stretches, jolting awake with that same memory he wasn't sure had happened. The trapdoor open, the fog gone, and the taste of iron in his mouth. Avila spent the early hours reviewing the tower's maintenance log, checking the fuel levels, and setting the emergency beacon for its daily pulse. But something was wrong with the cabin's atmosphere. Everything felt low. The ceiling seemed closer, the walls slightly more angled than before, like the structure was remembering a different shape. He didn't notice when the footsteps started. They didn't crash in, didn't echo. Just a wet, measured thump. One step, then another, above him, on the roof. His breath caught. Another step and another. Carefully placed, human in rhythm. Except the ceiling of the tower was flat. No access, no ladder, no overhang, no way to reach it unless you climbed the tower from the outside. He scanned the windows, saw nothing, picked up the floodlight and stepped out onto the balcony. The rain didn't let up. It fell heavier now. He tilted the beam upward. Nothing. No figure. No movement. He turned back and froze. Across the inside of the observation window, a wet trail, not footprints, handprints, 5-fingered. Palm dragging, smearing water and dirt, one after the other. As if someone had crawled across the window face first. Inside. Then the radio clicked on. No alert tone, no call sign. Just static. Then a voice. Broken. Warped, like it had been fed through a fan belt. Let me in. Silence. I'm with forestry. A pause. Then, forgot my key. Avila's throat closed. There was no passcode, no physical key. Towers didn't even have locks on the outer doors, just bolts from the inside. The voice came again, this time clearer. You saw me. I'm cold. I'm wet. Let me in. He stepped back, turned off the light. Then another voice, this time from the corner behind him. Same sentence, same voice. Let me in. The radio was off now, and yet it was still speaking. Every surface of the tower felt wrong. The wood grain was reversing itself, smooth where it should be coarse, cold where it should be dry. Then a second trail of handprints appeared, across the northern window. But this time, the prints were upside down. Palms up, fingers curving downward, like someone had pressed them against the glass while hanging from above. The footsteps returned, this time louder. 2 sets, and something dragging. The ceiling above him flexed, not cracking, not shaking, just pushing downward, as if someone was testing how much weight the roof could take. He didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was in the corner, flare in hand. The trapdoor slammed shut on its own. Then, all at once, silence again, but not the kind that soothes. This was a silence that listened back. The kind of quiet you feel when something is holding its breath, waiting to be answered. He picked up the emergency recorder, pressed record, and in a trembling voice he whispered, "There's something above me." Not on the mountain. On me. It doesn't want the tower. It wants the memory of it. He never heard the next message. But when the audio logs were recovered 3 months later, the last transmission from that night was unmistakable. Forestry confirms entry. Door unlocked. Tower already occupied. Requesting backup. No ranger ever said it. No one was dispatched. But someone answered. In Chapter 8, we find out who and what happened when the backup finally arrived. Subscribe to MindFuel. You want to know what happened at Tower 9? You really sure you want that? He clears his throat. It mimics voices, always just slightly off, like a warped record, familiar but too slow, or too clean. He pauses again, swallowing hard. I hadn't heard my wife's voice in 6 years. She passed from pancreatic cancer, buried out in Siskiyou under a pine she loved. That night, in the tower, it called me by her voice, said my name like she used to, the way she said it when I came in the door late from shift, with her apron still wet from dishes, the way only she said it. It said, "Raymond, you left the porch light on." A long silence on the tape. You tell me how it would know that. You tell me how something that never met her would say that exact thing. I looked out the east window. Fog was thick, but I saw a figure about 50 feet away, in the clearing. Should have known it wasn't her, but I froze. It waved at me, real slow. Arm too long, bent wrong. Then the voice came again. Through the walls this time. Not through the radio, through the damn wood. "Raymond, porch light." I didn't sleep after that. Didn't leave the tower for 3 days. 8 granola bars, and piss bottles, and kept the rifle close. They told me afterward, during my review, not to write anything down. Tower 9's already complicated, the district lead told me. Don't turn it into a fable. Don't write anything that lasts. He made me burn my logbook. Right there, in front of him. He watched every page curl in the bin. When I asked why, he said, "Because it remembers paper." That's what he said. Word for word, it remembers paper. Another pause. He lights a cigarette. The sound of the lighter echoes on the tape. You folks with your cameras and audio reels think you're making a show. You think this is about fear. It's not. It's about erosion. Not of dirt, of identity, of time, of what's real. Tower 9 wasn't destroyed in a fire. That's what they said. Arson. But no arsonist ever found. No fuel cans, no footprints, no trail camera footage, no heat source. Not even a lightning strike in the area for 2 weeks prior. One day it was there. The next, black soil. Scorched tower bones. Smelled like hot copper and citrus rind. But here's what makes my skin still crawl. The day after Tower 9 burned, I got a package. No return address. Wrapped in brown butcher paper. Inside was my own field log. The one I burned, same entries, same handwriting, even the ink blot from the day I spilled soup across the counter. But there was one extra page, at the end, a page I didn't write. It said, "We remember what you see, even if you forget, even if you lie, even if you burn." He laughs, but there's no humor in it. I left the service after that, moved to Nevada, started fixing up motorcycles. I sleep with white noise now, keeps the whispers out. But sometimes, on real, still nights, I hear her again, from the yard, just outside the dog door. She says, "Porch lights still on, Ray." That tape was never logged officially. It was sent anonymously to the regional forestry archives and labeled simply Tower 9, Testimony, Do Not Copy. But someone did. And now you heard it. In Chapter 9, the last survivor of Tower 12 tries to contact Avila, but the voice that answers him isn't human. Subscribe to MindFuel. Because the forest doesn't just echo, it replies. The nights stopped feeling like nights. The difference between dusk and midnight was only how long the batteries in the lanterns lasted. He started keeping his journal open to the same page for 3 nights straight, not out of laziness, but because he didn't know what to write anymore. If every entry became, "It's still watching," then what was the point? And it was. Watching. The lights began to flicker every evening at the exact same time. 8:47 p.m., not 8:46, not 8:48, always 8:47. He checked the wiring, replaced the converter, ran diagnostics, no voltage drop, no weather issue. Still 8:47, and always right after the second flicker. The same thing. A whisper. So faint he thought it might have been inside his own teeth. Just 3 words. "I see you too." He didn't move, didn't check the radio, didn't speak, just sat in the chair with his arms against his ribs, like someone bracing for an earthquake they couldn't stop. The next morning, he unpacked one of the tower's unused wildlife cams. Standard infrared sensor, designed for elk, coyote, maybe the occasional cougar wandering through the brush. Wrapped it in canvas, attached 50 feet of cord, and lowered it down from the balcony. Let it hang, face first. Pointed at the tower's base, checked the monitor feed. Nothing. Just grass, shadow, and the base's cement slab, cracked at the edges from age. But at 8:47 that night, the lights flickered, the whisper returned, and the monitor lit up. Not sudden, not jarring. The kind of motion that shouldn't be visible, like something had always been there, but only now decided to let itself be seen. A figure, humanoid, standing directly below the lens, looking straight up. No motion, no blinking. Just a head tilted slightly, mouth just open enough to show the dark line where teeth should be. The eyes were wrong, not glowing, just wet, as if they reflected back too much light, as if the lens itself was being stared into. Avila stepped back from the screen, hands hovering near the emergency beacon switch. But he didn't press it. Couldn't. Because something about the figure's stillness made a truth rise in him that he hadn't admitted yet. This thing hadn't found him. It had been waiting. The feed ran for 47 minutes. The figure never moved, never looked away, never blinked. And at 9:34, the exact second the internal lights powered back to full, the monitor cut to black. Avila checked the cam the next morning. It was still hanging. Still recording, but the footage was gone, erased. The only thing remaining was a blank black file, 47 minutes long, labeled in a folder that he had never created. "Your turn." The folder couldn't be deleted. Every attempt to erase it caused the screen to glitch. At one point, the cursor moved on its own, typed out 4 words in the tower's field log software. "I am in memory." He unplugged the monitor, locked the desk, sat in the corner and waited until morning. But as the first light broke over the ridge, something inside him shifted. A thought louder than fear. If it knows I'm watching, then maybe it wants to be remembered. Chapter 10 is the final log. The night Avila tried to leave Tower 11, and the thing in the forest asked him not to forget. Subscribe to MindFuel if you're still with us, because this isn't the end of the story. It's the part where the forest speaks back. Day 48. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours. I remember the way the light hit the cot that morning, how it looked too clean, like something freshly set, like it had never been laid in. My hands were shaking before I even knew why. The emergency radio, which hadn't made a sound in nearly 2 days, clicked on at exactly 4:09 a.m. No static, no dispatch call, just my own voice, calm, tired, recorded. saying the same thing I had written in my log 3 nights before. West line secure, no motion, no sounds, no threats detected. It was me. Same breath between phrases, same hesitation on secure. My voice. But I hadn't transmitted that. I had only written it. I reached for the binoculars. Hands barely working, scanned the tree line. Slowly, from left to right. Fog drifted low between the pines. Everything still. And then, at the center, just past the tree line, a figure standing upright, still, staring directly at the tower. Wearing my uniform. Same dark green, same patrol cap, same patch, faded on the right shoulder. Holding binoculars and waving. Just once. Slow. The way I had waved to the pilot that dropped me off 6 weeks ago. I lowered the lens, stepped back from the window. My legs wouldn't hold. I don't remember standing, but somehow I did. Unlocked the trapdoor, descended all 54 iron steps in under a minute. Hit the ground so fast I felt my knees go. But I ran. I ran to the trees, to the spot where I'd seen it. But the clearing was empty. No footprints, no broken branches, not even fog, just a pocket of unnatural stillness. The air felt thinner here, charged, like the moments right before lightning hits a field. I turned in a circle, scanning every trunk, every shadow, but nothing. It was gone, or worse, it had never been. And that thought did something to me, because I realized something terrifying. It hadn't become me. It wasn't copying. It was remembering, replaying something I hadn't said out loud, echoing a gesture I'd only ever made once, weeks ago, reconstructing a version of me from fragments, like a reflection building itself backwards. I walked back to the tower, but something in me didn't come back up the stairs. I locked the trap door, checked every bolt. Then I sat on the floor, back to the wall, eyes on the ladder below, waiting. Because I knew now that I wasn't in a tower watching a forest. I was in a cage, being watched by something that never blinked, and it had finally shown me what it wanted. Me. Or some version of me. Chapter 11 is the final log. The night the footsteps returned. But this time, they were inside the tower. Subscribe to MindFuel now. Because some memories aren't echoes, they're rehearsals. I stopped writing in the logbook on day 49. The pen was still there. The book was still open. But I couldn't pretend it mattered anymore. I was done documenting. There are some things you can't press into paper, some truths. They live in sound. That night I stayed sitting with my back against the wall and the radio switched off. I wanted silence. But silence is a myth in the forest. There's always something moving, something breathing. Around 2:10 a.m., I felt it. The vibration. Not sound at first. Not exactly. A subtle shift in the floor, as though the tower was adjusting itself, stretching. But it wasn't the wind. It wasn't weather. The air was completely still. And then the groan of steel. A screeching whine through the floor supports, like metal bending under pressure. I stood up too fast, hit the desk, papers scattered. Something was climbing the tower fast, the way you'd sprint upstairs when something's chasing you. Only this wasn't human. It didn't hesitate, didn't tire, didn't make mistakes, just up. The whole structure shook as it passed each support beam. I could feel it tracing the skeleton of the tower, the way a hand feels the spine of an animal it knows how to kill. Then the crying started, distorted, warped, not coming from below, not from outside. It came from the walls, as if the wood itself was exhaling grief. No words, just the awful, broken sound of something remembering how to weep. And beneath that, quieter, Another sound. My own voice, repeating words I'd never said out loud, sentences from letters I never sent, a lullaby my mother used to hum when I had fevers. The final sentence of the Tower 9 log. They climb now. My feet moved without instruction. I dragged the desk in front of the trapdoor, locked the side hatch, pressed my forehead against the glass, looked down, and I saw it. A shape, wrong in proportion, stretching its limbs across the final rung, climbing not with urgency, but purpose. It knew where I was, knew how I was, knew what I'd dreamt last night, what I missed from childhood, what name I whispered in sleep that no one had heard since the funeral. It wasn't just wearing skin. It wore memory. I stumbled back to the recorder, clicked it on. I needed to leave something behind, some proof that I had seen it, something to tell whoever found this that I hadn't imagined it, that it was real. I pressed record and spoke the final words of my service log. It wears faces, not just skin, voices too. This tower won't stop it. I turned off the mic, sat in the chair, hands folded in my lap like a man waiting for his name to be called. And I listened as the last step creaked under weight, the sound of the trapdoor latch turning, slowly, like a familiar hand pushing open a memory. And that's where the transmission ends. What happened to Ranger Avila after that night remains unknown. His tower was found empty. His boots were still beside the bed, no signs of a break-in. But etched into the wooden underside of the trapdoor, scratched deep by something sharper than any blade, were 3 words: "You remember now." Subscribe to MindFuel. We're not done yet, because Tower 9 wasn't the only one to burn, and Ranger Avila may not have been the last to hear his name spoken back to him by something that never had a mouth. Next episode, what they found in Tower 4. I wasn't supposed to be assigned to that sector. Tower 12 didn't even show up on the official orientation map. When I asked the supervisor, he skimmed his clipboard and muttered something about backup coverage, said the structure was outdated, barely used anymore. No fires in that stretch for years, he told me. But his tone was off, like he was repeating a line someone else had told him to say. When I arrived, I could tell. The tower had been sitting untouched for a long time. Dust on every step, mold in the sink, and silence. Not peaceful, not calm. The kind of silence that waits for you to acknowledge it before it shows you why it stayed behind. I only lasted 3 nights. On the 4th morning, I found a board loose under the cot. Pulled it up. And there it was. A small handheld recorder, battery half corroded, covered in dried pine needles, like something had tried to bury it inside the floor. I pressed play. It hissed for a moment. Then a voice crackled through. Hoarse, tired, like it belonged to someone who had already left, but wanted to say one last thing before the door closed behind him. It wears faces, not just skin, voices too. This tower won't stop it. And then silence, but not empty, full of something. Listening. I reported it to my regional contact, waited 2 weeks for a reply. What I got wasn't from my supervisor. It was from someone higher up. An email with one attachment. A scanned memo dated March 19th, 1996. Heading, Tower 12, decommissioned. Reason, structural instability due to repeated environmental stress. But that wasn't true. I'd been in that tower. The structure was solid. If anything, it felt watched over, like the tower itself had learned to brace against something worse than wind. I looked into other old logs, forest dispatch records, incident forms buried in regional databases. Tower 12 has no formal incident reports, no accident files, no transfer logs. It exists in only one way, by what it left behind. A voice, a final sentence, a feeling that something climbed up and never climbed back down. Last month, a friend in the survey team sent me a satellite capture from a recent aerial sweep. He thought it was a glitch. I didn't. You can see it clearly. The roof of Tower 12, and standing at the center, a single figure, head tilted back, staring directly up at the drone. If it's still there, if he's still there, then this story isn't over. And if you've ever seen something in the woods, something that moved like it knew you, something that remembered the way you forgot, leave it in the comments. Tell us what you saw, because Volume 2 is coming, and this time, we're going colder, higher. Voices Under Glacier National Park. Subscribe to MindFuel if you want to be the first to hear it. Some things were never meant to be found, but they remember where we left them.